Alrighty, it says we're live. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I am Noelle of Costuming Drama. These are my friends Abby and Kenna, and we are here today to bust some myths about that teeny tiny 18-inch waist. So why don't you ladies go ahead and introduce yourself. Abby, you want to tell everyone who you are, what you do, what your experience is, etc.?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Abby. It feels very Groundhog Day right now because Noelle and I just finished another live like an hour ago, so I apologize in advance for my but I am a dress historian. I have a master's degree in decorative arts and design history from the University of Glasgow in Scotland. You also might be familiar with two books that I published about 18th century dressmaking and 18th century beauty with American Duchess. I am now also a YouTuber and just general dress historian, academic nerd. So with a ever-growing extant garment collection, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. So excellent. I'm ready to get nerdy with everyone about this stuff.
I confirm.
Kenna, you want to tell us your credentials?
So I'm Kenna Libes. I'm Kenna Period Sews on Instagram if you're interested. I have a master's degree in public humanities from Brown University, which is essentially a degree in a combination of public history and museum studies. And I'm getting a second master's at FIT right now in really long program name, but essentially it's in dress history and textile conservation. So I am also very interested in extant garments and dress history.
Wow, that's an impressive pedigree. Okay, Kenna, why don't you talk to us a little bit about why we're here?
So, spite is definitely the biggest thing. Just being completely transparent here. I got annoyed about a year ago at the umpteenth Facebook post I had seen on one of our many historical costuming Facebook groups. And this person was reciting the age-old myth that most Victorian women had 18-inch waists. That's 45.5 centimeters for you metric people. So out of spite, I began looking through online collections of museums to see if they had anything larger than that. Like, spoiler, they do. So since Abby has kind of been making it her brand to examine extant garments on our own channel, we thought it would be a great idea to combine my research and her research and talk about it and just destroy this idea utterly. I have compiled a list over the past year now, 800 garments with larger than 25-inch waists and up to, I think, 46. So we've got proof for you and we are ready to dish.
I didn't realize you had that many garments. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Holy crap. That's amazing.
When we had the idea for this, it was 700 and now it's 800.
And I have some more to add to your list too, so.
Yeah, I haven't done those yet.
Alrighty, I think you guys have some disclaimers you want to go through, right?
Yeah. So for those of you watching, Noelle put out a request on her stories for terminology regarding size and body type, about what people like and what people don't like, and what makes people uncomfortable, what people like to call themselves, things like that. Unfortunately, literally 50-50 down the middle.
They were exactly the same list. The same words were used for people who like the words and people who don't like the words.
So we were literally just stuck. So we're trying to be very conscientious of words so that way we don't accidentally trigger anyone or make people uncomfortable. So one of the words that we will use is stout. And the reason that we're going to use the word stout is because academically speaking, historically speaking, that is the word that they used up until like the 1940s and 50s. Kenna has found a reference to it all the way back to the 1650s. So when we discuss stout sizing or stout proportions, we're saying that word specifically because that is what the primary documentation says. And since, as you all witnessed, Kenna and I are like super academic nerds, we really like primary source. So we will use stout. We're also just going to stick to larger and smaller. Just because that seems to be like out of everything the most widely accepted word and like phrasing we can use, but plus size might slip out, other words might slip out, so just please give us some grace with this one. Like, we tried real hard for this one, but
they tried real hard.
So that's just our disclaimer. And we might, if this gets really long, we might come back in and like remind everyone, especially if people in the chat are kind of responding to it. So for those of you watching, like, just FYI.
Yeah.
We also felt that stout was a better word because it's less used now. And so
Yes.
people might not have as negative reactions to it as other words. So
Yeah.
we have a couple more disclaimers for you. One
Yep.
about chronology. My collection, 800 garments, goes back 500 years. But what we're talking about is mostly going to be concentrated, 1700 to 1930 or so, just because that's where our respective specialties lie and we know the most about it.
As a piece of housekeeping, the slides that she'll show about this and a bunch of other information is in the description of this video. So you can follow along there. They also have bibliographies there.
Databases,
spreadsheets, all kinds of links that you can click if you're interested in this topic and would like to follow along or do a little more research on your own.
So size disclaimer, yes, some people did and do have 18-inch waists. We are not out to slam anyone who is smaller. We are simply here to talk about those who are not. This will also not be a straight discussion of corsetry or anything like that. I think Bernadette Banner has done a really great job. You can go over to her channel, previous videos, really fantastic. But we want this video to be more about myth busting in relation to extant garments and proof in that manner. So we will discuss corsetry where it's relevant.
And also how your body, I'm sorry, Kenna. I'm sorry. Also how your body, you who are watching this, that your body is normal in like the past. Someone had exactly your body type in the past. And we're going to talk about like ways that you can work to get the historic silhouette. Like just that. Sorry. I'm so sorry, Kenna.
No, that was a great
roll there.
We are absolutely here to get representation and make sure that people can hopefully see themselves in what we're showing. So measurements, we are, as you may have been able to tell, we are American. We will likely be discussing measurements off the hook entirely in inches, but I've made an effort on all of my slides to have the metric conversion. And if you do use metric, I think the most helpful thing you can do right now is get to the side and convert your bust, waist, hips from metric to inches, and that'll give you a frame of reference for what we're talking about.
This is what happens when you have academics on your channel. They give you both.
I had people ask when I originally made the list for metrics, so I had to go down and do it all, and now it's just,
now it's done.
I should think about.
I didn't do it for mine. I'm sorry, guys. Like multiply 2.54.
You remember that off the top of your head?
Yeah.
So yeah, last disclaimer is just we've made an effort to cite and source everything we're talking about, every kind of claim, just if you feel like fact checking or learning more. So again, there should be a doc either in the description or dropped in the chat somewhere that you will be able to find everything we're talking about.
Excellent. Anything else you guys want a disclaimer? I have one or two things to say as well. The first is that at some point during this video, as a surprise, the screen will switch and it will be the badge code. So the people who are looking for badge codes, who are playing the ribbon game, you'll get your code. So we do have one. The second piece of information I'd like to give you is that I will leave this video up forever until one of these people, these two people or wherever they are, tell me that they don't want it up anymore. So as long as they say it's okay, it will live in perpetuity for you. Do you guys have anything else you want to mention before we get started?
I don't think so.
All good. All right. So if women back then weren't so small, then why are so many garments so small? Why do we have this myth to begin with? And why don't I see garments on display that would be, say, my size? For anyone interested, my size is typically about a 16 in American. My waist is a 38, 39, and my bust is a 46.
So in 2 words, survival bias.
Yeah.
And we will be explaining all of this. Please, Noelle, do catch us if I say anything or Abby says anything that seems a little bit jargony. We should explain ourselves.
Okay. I'm jargon police.
Yes. So for basic context, textiles are pretty much the most fragile category of decorative arts. They don't last well, and on average, they're not treated well because, surprise, we wear them all the time. We wear them to death, really. So what we have in museums and private collections is merely a tiny fraction of what was actually made and worn. I've looked at many thousands of garments over the last year and more in online collections, and there are plenty of garments in the 22 to 24 inch range. There are actually considerably few of 20 inches or less in that waist size. But you'll notice that those garments tend to be really fancy. They're for evenings, they're for weddings. these have a tendency to survive because they were only worn once, maybe a few times maximum, and they couldn't fit anyone else. They were worn by young women, still growing, or people who were naturally very slight. Larger garments for these same occasions, on the other hand, can be altered to be smaller after, and they have a better chance of being passed on and worn by other people. Clothing that actually fit multiple family members was used by multiple family members. There were thriving secondhand markets for clothing in every century, guys. And clothing in average sizes or larger was used to death and turned into scraps and thrown away. It was just put through the ringer. Garments that only ever fit one person, especially if they were very fancy. Sorry, I'm gesturing with this pen. Especially if they were very fancy, they got just packed into the attic as heirlooms. So think about vintage market today. I mean, I constantly hear collectors bemoaning the fact that larger sizes used to be more common, like in the 60s, the 70s, you could totally find a size 12 out on the rack. But now they've all been bought because so many people are into vintage clothing. And so all that remains are the really small things. It's the same concept for antique dead stock, for size 6 display shoes at DSW that get left out because most people are much larger than that in size. I'm sure Abby can commiserate about that for American Duchess.
Yeah. So with that, at American Duchess, when I worked there, and I know it's still the same, but without fail, it's size 6 and size 11. That lasts the longest. And at American Duchess, we used to have size 10 and a half, but that is literally the most like least common size ever. And it was always the one shoe on the shelf. So yeah, like literally it never would like it just stayed. So, but the shoes that always sold were, yeah, anywhere from like 6.5 up to like 10. They sold out at, depending on just how popular they were, like they would sell it very quickly. And you actually see that too in historic shoes as well. 18th century shoes, you like Nicole, she has done a whole thing about like 18th century women's shoes, and they're all usually around like a size 8, like very, 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 very normal. So yeah, just like what survives is, it's like retail and stuff. Yeah, it's just the stuff that doesn't sell. Or the stuff that doesn't get worn. Because my grandma also, by the way, wore a size 9.5 shoe in like the 1930s and 40s. So they had to exist. Like,
this is why I don't get 9.5 shoes from American Duchess ever, because they're all sold out all the time.
Yeah.
Oops.
No, that's because I just take them all. No.
I'll be on my way to your house after this panel.
Closet full.
So I think also probably with shoes, the slight difference why you still have larger sizes is because you can't really cut them down into smaller sizes the same way you do with clothes. So
yeah. Exactly.
So a great example of survival bias is actually pretty logical for most people. You might not, it might be so just sensical that you don't even think about it. We have relatively few garments that date from before 1700 or so, and loads after 1800. By the time you get to 1890, there are so many in museums. They're just overflowing. They're really quite easy to find. I mean, yeah, look at Abby's collection.
My guest bedroom is currently overflowing with 1890s clothes.
They're really easy to find.
Everywhere.
So
yeah.
easy to find.
So if you think about it, like completely objectively, without the context at all, if you look at the clothing in museums, in collections, without accounting for survival bias, you might just assume that nobody wore clothing in the 1300s because we don't have any of it left, right?
Everyone was naked.
Running around naked.
But that's just silly. We know it just doesn't exist anymore. So you have to account for these other factors as well. If we switch to our slides now, pardon me while I...
Well, as you do that, another thing to think about when it comes to leading up to the 19th century, the reusing of textiles and antique clothing into making it modern, fashionable clothing was very, very common. It was super trendy in the 1840s to take 1760s gowns, cut them up because the textile was back in fashion, and make it an 1840s gown. So they literally would destroy what we would consider antique and vintage clothes to make modern clothes because they just didn't think about clothing in the same way that we do today.
I conserved a dress last year that had been made in the 1850s, was remodeled for an 1890s bash, and then was worn again in the 1930s. So it was really cool to look at all of those lives of that dress. Tangent, but so First slide, just to introduce some of the oldest garments on this list. And remember that we have relatively few items remaining from these time periods. So it's actually pretty significant that many of them are larger than you might expect. These are from 1520 to 1650 and have between 28 and 33-inch waists, which is 71 to 84 centimeters. And two of them are associated with nobility, Mary of Austria and Eleonora de Toledo. So just think about these for a minute. Also, a lot of the slides coming up are going to be of late Victorian gowns. Don't get the wrong idea. There are plenty of 18th century and early 19th century items on the list, but it's just easier to find good comparison images in an era where more garments survive. And it's always good to show that those wasp-waisted fashions, again, that's a historical term, can be done on larger figures. So let me switch here. Keep in mind that anything worn over a corseted silhouette will likely have been on a person who's already corseted down several inches. The stays at the top, ooh, are those stays not showing up?
No, I see them.
Okay.
I don't see stays.
Wait, what?
That's okay. There is a pair of 43-inch stays from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, PMA.
Oh.
Am I remembering that correctly?
Yep.
It should be showing up on this. I apologize. They are wonderful. They're just shown flat out, 43-inch waist. And they might have been worn closed, or they might have been worn on someone with like a 5-inch gap or something like that at max, 48-inch natural waist, something like that. We just don't know exactly what bodies these were worn on, but we can assume they were a little bit bigger than what the extant garments.
Are they on the previous slide? Because there was a pair of stays on that.
No.
Sorry, when I said I saw stays, it was because I was looking at this slide still on the YouTube.
Those are actually both bodices. They're not stays.
Oh, never mind. Just kidding.
Yeah, I don't know where they went. That's great. Anyway.
Nikki.
Yes.
Gremlins.
Oh.
Okay.
Whoa, that was magic.
Not knowing how to use Google Slides. That's fun. So there they are. Beautiful.
That was a sexy transition there, Kenna.
Yeah.
Totally intended. That was just supposed to be a surprise.
Masterful.
So now that those are up, I'm going to switch. So there's the issue of survival bias in museum collecting. Museum collecting is itself full of biases that we'll discuss in a bit. They're really interesting, and they lend themselves to further flawed studies. Oh, wait.
Ain't that the truth?
There we go. This is where I was supposed to be. So there's a study published in 2015 about the effects of long-term corseting on the female skeleton. They exhumed a bunch of bones, essentially, and measured the ribcage curves. It was really interesting, but it got reported on, and I have read the original study, so I'm not just like filtering things through other views here, but this was in the article, and it essentially stated that the average woman's waist size was 22 inches or 56 centimeters. Read a little further, and you find that the study consisted of, quote, more than a dozen corsets. So even though this seems like empirical evidence, we have to read this in light of several things. One, 12 corsets is by no means a good sample size. Yeah, we have zero way of knowing if they're representative of the entire population. They're probably from elite young women. And three, following that last note, there's no way they're representative of the entire population, because the Victoria and Albert Museum, where the stays came from, would not have bought or kept garments in bad condition, which most would have been. And there is 100% a museum bias towards collecting smaller garments. So things to consider. This study will come back up shortly, but just to get it out of the way, I'm sure many of you are curious. The real reason for this slide was the largest garments I've been able to find so far are actually Queen Victoria's late in life garments. A different paper was published last year in the journal Costume that detailed almost 40 of her garments, dresses, bloomers, anything else. I shouldn't use bloomers, I'm sorry, split drawers. I'm an academic. And the waist size is from 1830 to 1900s. And the waist sizes were 55 to 119 centimeters, because this is and 21.5 to 46.85 inches. And the study itself is like a little bit invasive in a way I don't like to think about, because who wants their body to be on display in that way after they die? Yeah. But the measurements are really helpful. So I'm just saying, here we are. These are two of her beautiful late 1890s morning gowns. So
yeah. So that's really cool, but that's just extant garments. It's still really rare that I see someone like myself in a photo or an ad or something like that when I'm looking at extant examples of magazines and stuff like that. Surely that 18-inch waist thing wouldn't persist if it were that wrong, right?
So a lot of it is just fantasy and romanticism. Most of it, I'm going to say. Valerie Steele, who is the director of the museum at FIT, has done some really fantastic research about the concept of it being fetishistic and really not based in reality. A lot of the news articles historically about tight lacing are vague, they're unsupported, they're apocryphal. Again, they're fetishistic to the extreme. And even obituaries that ascribe tight lacing as a cause of death ignore so many other potential causes and usually are really biased. Like,
never mind that bullet hole.
Yeah, never mind the bullet hole. They'll say like the woman was a drunkard and a prostitute and that she was eating too much the night before. And it's just all of these things stacking together. And you're like, well, you didn't like her at all in the first place, did you?
Right.
So, and what I'm reciting there is from the 1830s. So
they were like super salty. Like, these people were so petty. Like, you think Twitter's bad? Like, historic newspapers are awful. I'm sorry, can I go on?
I was just going to say 18 inches might have been an ideal that a very few people achieved, but it is and it was an unhealthy pipe dream for most people. And as you'll see in a bit, an 18-inch waist really can look identical to a 28-inch waist or more with the right dress. So
also, if you have like sketches of clothing even now, because they're all drawings, then the sketches people do of now, like, those aren't real body proportions at all, right? Croquettes.
Yeah, my legs will never be that long. Something that I thought of, Kenna, when you were talking is actually Nicole Rudolph. She wrote her master's thesis basically comparing medical text and the issues with women's fashion and the use of high-heeled, and I use that term loosely because they were like less than 3-inch heels, shoes and corsets were heavily intermixed, and they took turns blaming women's issues for this stuff. And so one minute it was the heeled shoes, the next minute it was the corset, but they also were assuming, I'm sorry, Nicole, I know you're probably watching this. She's probably in the chat, like typing lightning fast right now, but that they weren't taking tuberculosis really into account in the same way that we would today. And so they're like, oh yeah, women can. It's just like, well, she's got a disease, guys. Like,
no, she's definitely the corset.
Yeah. And like, oh, and by the way, apparently high-heeled shoes makes your uterus fall out. So there's that too. Definitely people we should be listening to when it comes to medical information.
Can I interrupt? We had a troll in the dungeon and I took care of it. So everyone can stop texting me that in the comments.
We have a troll in the dungeon. And another thing with satirical prints, especially in the 18th century, when you see satirical prints about tight lacing, it's not in praise of it. It is heavily criticizing vanity, which ties into morality, which ties into femininity, which ties into being a woman and being a proper woman in the 18th century. So a proper woman, and I'm big air quotes there, like would have dressed modestly, tidily, and she would not have been vain that way. And so there's actually a lot of very aggressive imagery when it comes to women tight lacing, and they are making fun of them. It is not something that is encouraged. It is something that is heavily mocked and ridiculed in imagery, especially satirical imagery of the 18th century. When you have satirical images like this, does that mean it was like there is truth in it? That's part of the satirical humor. It's like, okay, yeah, like ridiculous things were happening. So obviously we can assume that yes, women were doing very vain things and lacing down. I do it all the time. I will always lace tighter than I should because
you want to be snatched.
Yeah, I like being snatched. But like people mocked them for it. So, and men mocked women for it. So it, it's just something to kind of keep in mind that there's a lot of cultural stuff happening in these conversations that we are not privy to because we are not from that time. We are foreigners in that world. And so we have to look at things with a very nuanced perspective.
Did you also want to add something about the ads?
Do I?
The way
oh, sorry. I'm like, what?
Stay on target.
I don't read well. I just wave my hands around. So
for anyone that thinks that lives are actually just live, no, we have an outline.
Yeah, I'm just the one who's like, let's see where it went. Oh, yeah. So going through, and this is a database, a small little spreadsheet that I did just going off of my extant collection of magazines and catalogs from basically the 1880s up through like 1930. You actually see just as many weight gain ads, especially during certain eras where being considered too skinny, too thin was not ideal, as there are weight loss ads. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Like the shifting concept of ideal body is very fluid. And even if you sit back right now, just yourself, without going further into this, think about the ideal body today and how it has shifted from 2000 to 2020, because they're not the same ideals.
It's also a thing. That's why I wear Victorian clothes, is because that era had a queen who was not small. So lots of the outfits were made for people who were not small. So your larger ladies can look banging. And that's why I choose the costumes I do.
And there's also actually, so again, database. In that database, the spreadsheet that I did, I went through and I took note of the sizes of what was being sold for what, and also how it was being classified. So delineators up, like I have, my first delineator is 1883, and then I have another one to 1917. I have a blank spot in 1907 and like the early 1900s. So I jumped from 1899 to 1917 in my delineators. But 1888, 1883 to 1899, it is the same size range for women. And this is where things are going to start to go down a rabbit hole. And I don't know if this is the right time to do it, Kenna, but
do it. Run down
okay.
it. Go.
For women. Okay. So for women's sizes, it was between, so your bodice and your skirts were separate, but for bodices, it was usually around a 32, 34 inch bust up to like 44, 46 inch bust. All right. So that was standard. There was no differentiating of, you know, size, like stout size, like average size. Like there was none of that. It was just bam, 32 to 44. That's it. Same options. Nothing changed there. For skirts, for women's sizing, it was usually around 24 to like 40 something as well. Like it huge. I can't remember the exact number. It's in that spreadsheet.
Times were better.
Yeah. And it was completely inclusive. Like there was none of that whole trying to separate things out. Then I also have a catalog from the 1920s that is from Elmer Richards in Chicago. And the representation of their stout section was fascinating because it actually had several pages. And as a part of their advertising words, like the words that they were using to advertise their product, was also about how they have an entire department devoted to creating fashions according to stout proportions.
Yeah.
And we have that proportion in the slideshow. So we'll hit to it eventually. And what that says to me as a researcher is that if there is enough of, and also a former like person who like helped run a retail business, if there's enough demand to devote an entire design department to design clothes within this size range, that means there's enough customers. Like that's just very basic business right there. So actually really good representation throughout history. I honestly think we're the worst when it comes to representation for various sizes. Like we are the worst.
Well,
the other thing,
2000 was the worst. We're getting better.
Real bad.
Real bad.
Guess who was a teenager in 2000? It was not fun.
Hey, what's up?
The other thing that I really want to stress here that Ken and I talked about at length privately is when I was going through the delineators and I was going through vintage catalogs, they use the term Mrs. Mrs. sizing is for kids in the past. And it's sizes 10 through usually 16, maybe 17. That number is in accordance to the average proportion of a kid at that age.
It's like children's sizing now where you
Literally
buy a 4 for 4-year-olds.
Yeah. And it's 10 through 16, 18 years old. When you see the 22-inch waist, when you see those really small numbers, it's kids. Like when you see a bodice, and this is where I'm like, oh, is it time to like bust out my phone? But I have some Extants in front of me. I have bodices that to me, based off of the proportions, they are absolutely from teenagers, you know, but it might be a 24-inch waist. It might be a 22-inch waist, because that was the crossover point for misses to women's. It was around that 22, 24-inch waist. But the shoulders, the length, the body, like the proportions of the bust to waist, it shifts. And we have proportions.
And hips for sure, right? Because
Yeah.
as you grow
Yeah.
older, you get bigger hips.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. It's like I might have always like I'll say my boob showed up when I was 17. Like I went from wearing a 34B cup to wearing a 34C cup. And like I've been fairly standard at that. But that was when I was 17, 18 years old. So, you know, your body shifts, and as I'm sure a lot of people out there are saying, like, can relate to, your body changes when you're in your mid-20s, your body changes when you're in your 30s, and that's without even having children.
From early 40s, it shifts again, kids. So
yeah,
prepare yourselves.
So but when we see misses as modern people, we don't automatically assume that that's teenagers, because the way we use misses today, which is a whole other rabbit hole altogether, is very different. But misses in the past, misses like pre-1917, pre-1920, pre-1930, it's kids.
Yeah.
And so when you see a size 10 misses, it's literally for a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
So that's something as well. So
Kenna, there's early Photoshop too, yeah, right? Like they doctor their photos, yeah?
Yeah, so that was a wonderful tangent, and I will actually hit on it in a minute. Okay. But going back to answering the question, yeah, Noelle, absolutely. Early forms of Photoshop are very much to blame. There are clear signs of editing in a lot of these old postcards and photos. The model Polaire is really famous for, there's just this one image that goes all around Pinterest and Google, and her waist is like this. And it's
ridiculous.
It's literally impossible. And you can tell there's grain on the sides of it where they've Photoshopped it out, where they just overlaid it with the color of the background. And Cynthia of Red Threaded has a really great blog post from 2 or 3 years ago in her ironwork gown that she basically did that to show as an example of what it can achieve and what it was used for. So I definitely direct people over there if they'd like to see anything about that. But fashion plates and advertisements also feed into this whole myth a lot. Look at what's advertised today, as Abby was saying. I had someone present the argument to me a little while ago that Victorian commercial clothing pattern sizes, because remember, McCall and Butterick started in the mid to late 1800s, that those pattern sizes represented the average population, which was really incredible to me. I sat back and went, how did you come up with that? Because just look at sewing patterns today in the time of the big three commercial pattern companies. They do accommodate for more body fat than in previous decades and centuries. Let me pull up that slide now that Abby mentioned.
The ease that's in those garments is ridiculous too.
Yeah, that's absolutely an issue with it. So here's our stout figure in the older woman, which is maybe something we can talk about at some point as well, but not to unpack that right now. I'm not exactly sure how you can calculate averages from a sewing pattern chart. Feel free to enlighten me. But the median size in the current McCall's chart, for example, is between sizes 14 and 16. Which are waist sizes 28 and 30 inches. I'm 30 inches and I'm not tiny.
And everyone needs to be clear that those are pattern sizes, not modern fashion sizes. Because in a modern fashion size, I wear a size 16. And in a pattern size, I wear a size 22 to 24. And when you see that 22 to 24, if you're used to seeing a 16, you want to choke. The realistic view of the world is that you are the 22 and 24, and the fashion size is the lie.
So that actually goes back to what Abby was saying about the size labeling, that we think that pattern size labeling came from age and bust size initially, and then at some point got all mixed up. So yeah, do not feel bad about that. It is not your fault at all. But anyway, the CDC gives the average US woman's waist size right now as 38.7 inches. That measurement is only accommodated by the second to last size in the McCall size chart, which has quite a broad range. So, you know, patterns and advertisements have never, ever, ever been representative of the full population, whether that's size, skin color, ability, age, anything. You just can't use that to actually think and interrogate history like that. It won't work.
So, like, Kenna, how do you tell what's real? Like, is everything completely unrealistic and there's just no way to tell like what to do with anything? Like, how do you even solve this problem?
So the expectations are definitely unrealistic, but at the same time, there's some truth behind them. There was an anthropological study done in 2015 that I mentioned earlier that actually showed quite convincingly that corsetry during your formational years changed your rib shape. So if you're looking down from on top of me right now, and these are my ribs, corsetry will kind of make them more circular instead of that oval shape that we saw before. So if you've been trying and trying to get that perfect V shape in your corset and you can't, because your ribs are there.
Because you're a person who has bones.
Yeah, and you weren't put in a corset from a formative age. So as Bernadette has described, it's also just genetics, as I think Abby wants to talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of people, especially if you haven't worked with a lot of other bodies, like if you are someone who's only ever really sewed for yourself and you just kind of not had to be challenged by other different bodies, that's when you start, like, there is a disconnect here. So bodies are super weird. All right. Like no one has an average body. Bodies are so strange and they're asymmetrical and humans are gross.
Weird.
Our
and
badges, bodies are weird.
Bodies are weird.
If that wasn't obvious enough.
Bodies are super weird. That genetics
and super normal. They're all normal.
It's like if your body wasn't weird, then that's actually the problem. No. So when it comes to corsetry and genetics, something else to keep in mind is that sometimes it is very, very easy for bodies to lace down. It is very easy for my body to lace down. One of the reasons for this is that I actually have a narrow rib cage. Like my rib bones they're more rounded and they're just smaller. I have massive feet and hands, itty bitty rib cage. I also have a very long torso. I can shove my massive fist between my hip bone and my ribs and I can just push in. I have a long torso and I have a narrow rib cage. What that means is that when you put me into a corset, my body goes, whee! This is great.
And my body does not. I corset down about 1/2 inch to 1 inch total because I have a large, strong rib cage and I have huge stomach muscles that don't squish.
Exactly. And if you are someone who has a short torso and you don't have space between your hip bone and your rib cage, there's literally not a lot of room for that nip to even go. And then, when you have a rib cage, if it is broad or just shaped differently, I actually had an ex-boyfriend who had an extra rib bone. So there's that too. Like, and not that he wore corsets, but just random fact.
Was his name Adam?
No. But so your body sometimes just will not lace down. It has nothing to do with your body being modern versus historic. It is just genetics, and you inherited that DNA from someone. So it's working with what you have. And literally the two mannequins behind me are both very short-waisted, very petite women. Like this one, she's a 33-inch bust and a 30-inch waist. My mannequin is a 26-inch waist. I can't get her shut because the boobs are not in the right place. So it's not that she's my mannequin's too big. Mm-hmm. It's that my mannequin is too tall from here to here and here to here. Too. Yeah. And the boobs are not in the right place.
You can see on mine, I actually had to move my boobs up. You can see the additional padding in the shot.
Yeah. So both of these women behind me had, like just very short torsos. This one is a 44-inch bust and what is this one? 35-inch waist? Yeah, it's a 35-inch waist. And the other thing about this one, she actually had very little bust too. So just going into the genetics of the Extants, her bust circumference measurement is mostly actually in her back. So when we were padding out this mannequin, we had to yank in the foam boobs to make them smaller because they were putting pressure on the front here, but we cannot pad out her back enough.
And I have a very small back and everything's in the front.
Yeah.
So yeah, bodies are all different.
Like,
Can I
big.
do a housekeeping real quick? You guys, we are
Yes.
going to take cues for more A's at the end. So just save your questions and I'll let you know when to pile them at the bottom because I won't be able to go all the way back up. So go ahead.
And we also had to pad her out here. Noelle, do you want to turn on my iPhone?
Yeah. Oh, no, you have to.
Oh, I have to since we're here.
I asked you to start. You have to push the start video. There we go. Oh,
I'm so sorry, guys, if this gets real like trippy.
This is like those haunted house TV shows where they switch to like overhead cam.
But we had to pad out down here because
Noelle, can you spotlight her?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's probably going to where my audio is instead of.
There we go.
That has. Hold on.
You're good.
Okay. Am I?
Yep.
I have a thing. Okay. Oh, I see what it's asking me. Never mind. So she has a super short waist, but she was very, very full at the hip. But here on the side, you can see how she does not have a big bust at all.
Yeah.
So, like I said, she's a 44-inch bust measurement, but that's not actually her cup size. And then her waist as well, the proportion from here to here is very, very short. But she also wore a massive bustle. Like check her out.
That's what I'm talking about right there.
Yeah.
That's the girl, Mima.
So yeah, she gives me very big Queen Victoria vibe. So I call her Mima because she's also really short just in general. And so I just like want to hug her. And
what if it was Queen Victoria's? Oh my God.
Since it came from Kentucky, I'm going to say probably not.
You don't know. People had relatives in the
United
United
States.
States.
Date range approximately.
Oh, it is absolutely. But I'm so sorry, guys. I am moving this
Probably that waist size around that time.
Yeah. So this one is an 1880s Polonaise. I actually think these women might have come from the same collection because my mom acquired both of these pieces at the same time. So I do have a thought that maybe this is someone else in this woman's family because again, it's super short here. And like, but she doesn't carry as much weight back here, but it's just the shortness of the torso. You can see 1880s. Are you guys seeing this okay? Or should I back it up a little bit?
Yep, that would be good.
Here.
Yeah, great.
And then but yeah, so this is a 30-inch bust and a 30-inch waist, 33-inch bust, which also goes into our proportion discussion as well. But they're just really short. They're just teeny. Like they're just this doesn't unique body. He's a much shorter mannequin.
We're gonna go into a Sir Mix-a-Lot video in just a minute.
I know. You can take it off of this for now, Noelle.
I'm also gonna cut in here and give another example that in the olden days before I knew you really shouldn't put old clothing on actual people, I have an 1890s bodice in my possession and it's very small. It's got a 23-inch waist and a fairly small bust as well. And lo and behold, I happen to have a friend with a 23-inch waist, and I asked her if she would like to try it on very carefully, and she did, and it fit completely fine down the bust. It fit at the waist, but it gapped about an inch over her ribs.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just the most interesting thing I had ever seen because her shoulders, everything else fit totally fine, but her ribs were just too long in the sides.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't been kind of compressed by a corset in the right way. So
yeah. Let's
hey,
see.
Kenna, is a hot dog a sandwich?
if I went to a sandwich shop in the US, I couldn't get a hot dog, so no.
Okay.
Ooh.
Is cereal soup?
No, if I went to a soup shop, I couldn't get a cereal. What's wrong with you, Noah?
Is lasagna a cake?
If I went to a cake shop, I guarantee you I could not find lasagna, so no.
So I'm going to take all of Kenna's credentials away as an academic at this point because the Merriam-Webster defines all of those things as yes. I'm the only person who went to the dictionary. I got you. I belong with the academic. Links down below.
How dare you do this to me in the middle?
How is Kenna gonna get hired for her amazing museum job now that she won't like?
It's not going to be anything else in this video. It's going to be the fact that they disagree with me about a hot dog, cake, and cereal, and that's just the end of it. Thanks.
It's like, sorry, you're not a good cultural fit.
Thought I would take it down a notch.
Just delete that part. Nothing else. Just that.
Alrighty.
Good Lord.
Oh goodness. Oh, that was fun. That was fun.
So did you have some slides you wanted to show us, Kenna?
Yeah.
I think that might have been for the next section, but there was something I wanted to mention that Abby pointed out to me. Actually, it didn't even really occur to me until we had a protracted discussion the other day. But old patterns and dress styles and stuff, you bought your clothing by the bust measurement. The waist didn't even matter. Like when you get an old pattern, and I have seen this for myself, it's the bust measurement is the size. They don't tell you anything about the waist. So
yeah. And that ties into proportion, which I don't know if we're ready to go into proportion yet, but that's a part of the proportion discussion where they are assuming that your bust to waist ratio is proportionate to what is considered standard at that point in time in history, what is considered the ideal proportions, quote, 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 quote. So what that means is, and this gets kind of like matrixy in the brain, you buy your corset in the past, or you have it made according to your waist size. And then the spring of the hip and the bust is supposed to then create that ideal proportion. So if you are someone who maybe has a 30-inch waist, but you lace down to a 27-inch in a corset, but your bust is actually a bit small, so maybe you're like a 32-inch bust or a 34-inch bust, you will still have that ideal. So like, yeah, 27. So you're going to be around like 36, 38 up here in the bust with that Victorian general corset, and you're not going to fill it out. You don't bring the bust in. You pad the bust out in the corset. And then once you've reached that, then you buy your bodice pattern according to that new bust measurement. So your corset's based off your waist, but your bodice is based off your bust. So padding everything out is how they did it. And it's how we should be doing it too. So like literally it's all pillows inside anyways.
Yeah. Spoilers for the rest of this whole discussion.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
So what is realistic, guys? Like how do you pad it out? What did people do to look ideal, right?
So it's all about illusion, 100%. Now we can finally get into my set of the Extant garments. See how fast I can do this. I'm getting faster every time. It's great.
Sorry about that previous interruption there. My phone started just screaming and I didn't even touch it. So I was like, I just threw it out the door. I'm like, poosh.
I just had this image of like the screaming goat meme like coming out of your phone.
It started crackling and I was like, what even happened?
Do that if we get too anxious just in the middle of the discussion. Screaming goat. That'll be great. Love you. So these bodices are a great example of
Wow.
Sorry, yes, thank you.
Wow.
I got ahead of myself. The basic concepts here that Abby was just discussing are, one, the larger the bust, shoulders, and hips, the smaller the waist seems. So again, illusion. Two, the V-shaped bodice points that are popular in especially the 1840s, 1860s, Edwardian era. They elongate the waist and make your actual waist seem smaller because they continue it down. Three, corsets don't actually need to make the waist smaller all around. They just redistribute the fat. So instead of that, you're like that, even if you're the same size. I mean, I wear a red threaded corset for every day because I hate bras on like just standard, and I don't corset down at all. It just is 30 the whole time and it looks better, you know?
It just does look better. I agree with that. It pushes everything that it can push for me straight down.
So all of that in mind, these are a great example of what I was mentioning earlier. And I asked a friend the other day, once I made up this whole slideshow, if she could tell which of these dresses had the smallest waist. And she picked the left one, which I think I would have picked that too originally. But from left to right, they actually have 26-inch, 19-inch, and 35-inch waists. So the middle one is actually the smallest. The right-hand one is the largest. But all of them look, if not identical, they look pretty similar because of the way that they have very large hips and very large shoulders, especially on some of them, and busts. And note the bust difference is actually much smaller on that orange gown. It has a 7-inch difference between waist and bust, while the ivory dress has a massive 13-inch difference. But they both seem pretty equal, all things considered. Dressing your bust up with that extra puff, beads, danglies, totally viable trick. So next one, this example is from circa 1900 and goes to show that naturally small waists don't necessarily help if you haven't added all that padding that Abby was talking about.
And can I ask a quick question about these? Are these all from England?
They're no.
No. Okay.
Short answer, no.
Great.
They're probably mostly from America, and then some are from England and other locations. I should have said that earlier. All of these will have numbers next to them, which is an accession number or an inventory number. These, for example, are from an antique dealer's website. So if you eventually go to these slides, click that link, copy F, try to find that number on the site, and you'll find the dress. The other ones have museum accession numbers, which museums generally have online search capabilities for their collections, and you can put the number into the search and get the dress. So there are ways to find everything here. So basically, you need the padding. Even if you're naturally small, you need it because the gown on the left looks like a much straighter silhouette than the one on the right, even though it has 22-inch waist. The gown on the right has a 30-inch waist, but it's more ideal of a silhouette. And I just think this is a wonderful example of that. It's all about silhouette and how you pad and smooth. It's not about how tiny your waist actually is. Hopefully that helps someone make someone feel better. These are examples from the 1840s. Again, having a naturally small waist doesn't necessarily help you become that fashionable ideal by itself, unless you're also naturally extremely curvy. And few people are built like that. Some are, most aren't. There's about the same amount of space between the waist and arms of both the left and the right images here, but one has a 35-inch waist and one has a 21.5-inch waist. The middle image, which looks extremely slim and tubular in that interestingly disproportionate 1840s way that I so love, actually has a 27-inch waist. I suspect the original wearer was quite tall and had a long torso, which contributes to the overall effect, but just goes to show it's all about illusion. If these three gowns were put together in real life and you were standing in front of them, it would be a lot more obvious which one was larger, smaller, and so on. I think that gown on the right, the silver one, it was probably made for a very short person, and that's why the waist doesn't actually seem all that small in comparison. And you can also tell that the way the skirt is supported at the hips, there are very large hips, it makes that waist look smaller. So again, tips and tricks. That didn't go, there we go. This is also a great set of gowns that I came on only the other day. It was wonderful. They're all made for the same woman. So they all have the same waist and bust measurements. 32-inch waist, 40-inch bust, that's 81 centimeters and 101 centimeters. They're a great example of how skirt length can affect appearance. It might also be that the photos were slightly taken not at the right angle, but I think overall this is a very good example of skirt length because the left-hand garments, the green ones, were dresses meant for staying in, so they had very long hems. So they have 42-inch long skirts at the front. But the purple gown on the right, it must have been made maybe for walking or for visiting or something like that. And it actually has 5 inches higher of a hem, 13 inches taken off. And you can actually tell how it looks a lot shorter and therefore a little bit stouter just because of it. It has a really good big bust effect there that helps that waist look smaller in return. So they're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're trading off there. They're making other things larger to account for something they can't control as much. So you can also tell with the longer skirts, if they're longer, they're going to have a wider hem. And so that more flared bottom also contributes to making a waist look smaller. Last one for now, I can get there. So this is one of my favorite gowns on the entire list. Yeah.
So pretty.
So this is, and it's an Emilia Pingat gown. So this is couture. This is French Parisian couture. It demonstrates really importantly that larger women absolutely dressed well. 37.5-inch waist, if I am remembering correctly. My little Zoom thing is in front of that, so that's.
I could fit into this. I could corset into this if I had to.
So
I hear your gears turning, Noelle.
Yep.
This was for sale. I'm just saying.
I want it.
Not that I could know that in any way.
You would cry if I wore that.
It shows really importantly, you can tell that ideal bust isn't here, but she looks amazing because everything is smoothed out and padded properly. I mean, it is just so important to do that. So I think that, well, larger women absolutely dressed well, and that dressmakers knew how to produce an amazing look on any kind of form, unlike a lot of couturiers today. I would venture to say that while a small waist was definitely an ideal, it was actually more highly valued in general that one dressed tastefully and fashionably to whatever their figure was. So, and fun note, I came upon in 1896 newspaper articles the other day the mention of a Rubens Club in New York City, and that refers to the old master painter Rubens, who is famous for his voluptuous women in paintings. And the club's goal was populated by elite, wealthy women. They wanted to find dressmakers who would dress them fashionably. So just really cool, you know, guys, you existed. You were out there. You looked great.
So how did they do that? How do they achieve it? I am neither symmetrical nor smooth nor like, you know, all of that. And I would like to be. How did they do that?
So as Abby, spoiled for everything. Good going, Abby. I'm kidding, by the way. They padded everything out. Everything. And in so many ways. Just every material you could think of has been made into some sort of support. Bum rolls, chicken cutlets, by which I mean bust improvers, even bustles and crinolines absolutely count for this. I think most people probably consider them to be a different level or kind of bodily improvement, so to speak, than bust and hip padding, but it's really all the same thing. It's building around your body to achieve an ideal silhouette.
For those who don't know what chicken cutlets are, they are, well, back then it was padding that you could put in your bust area to help make your bust appear larger. Now they're made out of silicone and they literally look like raw chicken, which is why they're called that. So,
and you could see padding in corsetry, so something that you would add to your corset, but also you see padding in extant garments as well. So I have quite a few garments that really pad out right here in that side boob area.
There's a crack that forms right here.
Yeah, and so like they pad that out, but you will also see padding like in the actual bust itself
and in the butt area.
Yeah, like you just just stuff it. Just stuff it.
I'm gonna go through a bunch of slides and then let Abby loose. So it'll be great.
Crazy.
Slide it up, girl.
So what they were just mentioning.
Oh, perfect.
I know, right? So it's not so much a standard in earlier gowns, but built-in padding is a huge thing in Victorian gowns. It's hard to get, as they were saying, a smooth silhouette over this crease here. And if you want a smooth silhouette there, you have to put something there because you know you can't really liquefy your bust to smoothly go up there. That's a really weird image. Sorry for introducing that. So if you look at this, the padding in the 1840s gown on the right, you can tell it's kind of that side thing. It's more for that smoothness. If you look at the 1860s gown on the left, you can tell it's actually, there's quite a bit of stuffing in there and it's actually in the front. So that was bust improvement, as they would call it. You can tell there's more in there. And that could be horsehair, wool, fabric scraps, just anything you have on hand. And if you go into our doc or in the description, wherever it is, I have several Google Books entries of sewing manuals telling you what to put in there, how to put it in. There's one really interesting one that talks about padding out your sleeve to gain a very uniform arm. So, you know, nothing is sacred. Yeah, it's everywhere. So more things, all sorts of types, patents are for these kinds of things abound. The bust supporter at right is quote unquote, especially for stout women. So again, everybody needs that bust support, even if you're already like pretty well endowed there. And it's also pretty similar to a modern bra. And it claims all deficiency of development supplied means it's padded. Padding is not just for smaller forms to become more voluptuous, it is for larger forms to become more proportional for the ideal. The other two examples here have been recently used by costumers actually to achieve a more ideal look, so you can go find them. The left-hand one, Bernadette Banner, made a really cool bust improver with feather boning, very similar to this. And then the middle one, the boudoir key, recreated the hip form girdle. So very cool stuff.
Bernadette is watching this video, by the way.
Oh, hi, Bernadette. So gowns can also have fitted linings. If so, say you have a 30-inch bust like the woman here did, fitted lining. So there's nothing under there. You're not wearing chicken cutlets. You're not wearing your bust improver underneath there, but you have something in between the outer layer of your gown and your lining. And in this case, it's a really interesting gathered panel that just provides some oomph. And then on top of the gown, once that comes down and fastens, Edwardian gowns are famous for this, really good place to do it. There's just ruffles everywhere. And they just make it look bigger. So even though that's a 30-inch bust, if you measure gently with a measuring tape around the outside of this whole thing, it might be like 36.
Can I jump in there real fast with an addition to this? So my 1899 delineator has an outfit that's not exactly like this, but similar. And they actually say in the description with all these ruffles that it's good for a slight figure. So like, obviously this woman was trying to build out her bust, but they were also advertising their patterns to be for slighter figures to make them have the illusion of a larger bust line. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, that was really useful. It all just goes to show that it's really important to get the right silhouette and proportions than it is to be a particular size. And even then, I mean, again, smoothness is really important, but even then, plenty of photographs show wrinkling, caving in of places. You really don't need perfect tailoring either to be accurate for whatever that's worth. So what we're discussing is the ideal. You don't even need to be that to be a perfect costumer.
Are we hanging on to our hats and glasses and letting a wild Abby loose? The comment section is lit about letting Abby loose, by the way. Like on fire.
No, I'm just like a wet noodle. I'm like, I don't know. Road video might go suck.
All right. Turn your phone on. Yeah.
Yes, but I actually redressed this one while Kenna was on a slideshow because we're talking about alterations. So this is one of my newest acquisitions. She is, we think, probably like turn of the century, like delicious wool coat. It goes to about the knees. But what is great about this one is that its waist right now is a 29-inch waist.
God, that's a sexy jacket.
Oh.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's real. It's from New Jersey. It's real nice.
That does not make it sexy.
Everything's legal in Jersey.
Including sexy jackets. You haven't even seen the back yet. Okay, Grandma, we gotta move.
Meemaw leaving. Oh,
bye, Meemaw.
Meemaw's is gonna like
hang out over there
and judge me silently. I like to think she smells like peppermint, but that's just me. Come here, you. All right.
I didn't even know what to say to that, and I always know what to say to that.
So I want to show off. My mannequin still has a bustle on from that Polonaise cotton, so this is a bit skewed. But yeah, guys, can we just take a moment to enjoy this? Like, I literally just got her like
you here. I'm gonna
like
make
2 days ago.
There. Now you're huge.
So, she's beautiful.
She is beautiful.
She's gorgeous. Her altered waist to be taken in several inches is 29 inches. The original measurements for this. Let me get the, come here, come here, there we go. All right, Noelle, can you turn my phone on for me?
No,
please?
you have to turn your phone on. We did this last time too.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Third time's the charm.
She'll get there. Let me unspotlight you though.
Okay.
Well, spotlight her phone.
Yep, as soon as it's on.
I thought I turned it on.
You don't
Nope.
want a big black screen?
No. Still no.
Oh, it's because of the way, I'm sorry, guys. It's because of where my, oh, here we go.
There you go. Spotlighting Abby Cam.
Abby Cam! So, let me unplug my phone real fast.
Oh my gosh,
Sorry,
you're downstairs. I had no idea.
No, I'm in my sewing room.
Oh, okay.
No, this is right next to where I was.
Wow.
This is the dart that was taken in on both sides.
Wow.
So it starts at her underarm.
That has to be a case of someone giving it to someone else secondhand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's there, and it actually gets wider as it goes down the hip.
Wow.
So where's it end? It ends somewhere around here. So about here, and then it flares back out. So that is at least an inch on either side, and it is the same here.
So a hot 33-inch waist.
Wow.
Yeah, it's delicious. Just gorgeous. Please excuse my hair. You're going to stare at this mannequin because I'm too embarrassed by the other side of my sewing room.
Here, I'll just unspotlight you.
Well, I need to go back to it because I want to show you guys the alteration point from the outside.
All right.
Here we go.
They can look at all of us. All right. Spotlighting again. There you go. Wow.
So here you can see where they basically took in an entire side piece right here. But you can see how the seam doesn't really line up that nice, but it looks fantastic on the mannequin. I mean, this thing is just gorgeous. But this is a great example of something being altered to be taken in, but also could very easily be let out again. So even if it was something that the woman, she altered it to change for her body, it is done in such a way that this could be let out again and go back to its original measurements. We also, there's also a theory that this tape here was taken in just to kind of change the sleeve shape to update it with fashions. But yeah, this is an incredible alteration of a coat that, had like a 33-inch waist to begin with and is still now just a 29-inch waist.
People, when you're taking in and letting out your own garments, pro tip, leave it there in case you gain weight again or need to give it away, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now I have to figure out how to get to the other side of my sewing room. So we're going on an adventure. Welcome to my messy sewing room. Abby Cam, I'm going to turn on me because I'm too embarrassed. Don't look. Oh, sorry.
Now this really is a Haunted Mansion video.
Yeah, sorry. I
be more embarrassed for my sewing room.
The evening light. So this one here is actually an example of a missus. So I wanted to show this to you guys. You can see that she super narrow shoulders here, just kind of overall very small proportions, but her waist is around a 24-inch waist. But it's just the overall, the arm size, this here, just all of this, you can just see how much smaller it is just overall, which to me indicates that it's actually a Mrs. garment and was made for someone who's probably around 15, 16 years old. This skirt over here is also a brand new acquisition of mine. It is a beautiful plain wool petticoat. It has a 29-inch waist plus, probably up to 30 or more. And then I have another garment here, which is a beautiful Edwardian shirtwaist, center back closing, but this one goes up to a 29-inch waist as well.
Please note that blouse has boning.
Yes. And it's just so that it's the fitted lining, and then the outside of it has just been draped to fit the lining. So this as well is a perfectly just lovely 29-inch waist, and then just a nice wide shot of grandma over there.
Abby, are you a 29-inch waist by any chance?
Naturally, at this point, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you take me off my shaky Abby cam?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, right now I am a 29-inch waist when, and that's kind of usually where I end up hanging out is around a 29, 30.
You have some beautiful things to try on, my friend.
Not with my linebacker shoulders. No, I will blow those things out. So back to the bodies are weird. I actually carry a lot of weight in my body, in my upper arms. So, which actually just helps with the illusion of my waist looking smaller than what it actually is because I'm so broad on top. So.
Well, you don't need any of the arm padding that.
No.
Let's talk about. So
no, I don't. So that's it. Was that enough? Are there any questions about the garments?
People want that jacket back on the dress form. That's what I got out of that so far.
We don't want to see a naked mannequin. Come on, guys. They want
a really nice shot of that dress on the dress form is really what they want. So you guys, what happens if I fluctuate in size? How did they deal with that? I think part of what Abby just showed was some of it, but yeah.
I think honestly, the best thing is to plan for it in advance.
Yeah.
So when you're making your garment, plan for it. Use larger seam allowances. Use an inch or more instead of half an inch or less if I don't know what patterns you're using. But make sure it can't be on curved seams necessarily because you're gonna have to clip that, but especially on side seams that are quite straight, great thing. Just cut your seam allowance a little bigger, leave that in there in case you need to let it out. Save your trims, save your cabbage. If you need to piece a little addition in there, a gusset later on at some point. Yes?
All right. Mima, I forgot if you, sorry, Kenna, you just like reminded me.
I thought I saw something in there. Yes, please show us.
Okay.
Real quick while you're doing that, Abby, people are, the number one comment is, Abby, make us a pattern, please.
We'll see.
We'll see.
I'm not saying no,
Nicole
but
is in the comments. That's something that might be important.
So can you guys see this?
Pit stains.
Yeah, other than the pit stains.
Not the gusset. No, you're gonna have to switch
Hashtag-
off your phone.
Okay.
I
just
can
feel back
zoom you
in-
in though. Let me spotlight you. Here, see if you can. Oh, we're going to.
I think to
Just
get
go
into pitch detail, we need to zoom in there.
Alrighty.
I'm requesting permission. It says you've disabled it. Noelle?
No. Here, ask to
There we
start
go.
now. And I'm spotlighting you. All right, you're on. Pit stains and all. Ooh, gusset.
So yeah, so here you can see a very clear gusset that's been added to the underarm of her seam. That is just a delightful wedge shape, which I need to keep in mind for myself. So she's had it pieced here, and then this one doesn't spin that well. She didn't even try to make this nice.
Oh man.
Wow.
Like it's still the same up here. I'm sorry, guys. Big when Abby wears a statement sleeve. So can you guys see that? Okay.
Yeah, can you put the camera down just a little bit? Yeah.
Is that good? Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. So up here at her underarm point, that's still the original seam. So they just picked it out in this metal section here, and they just let it
go.
just do its thing.
Okay.
Like it's just doing its thing. And then up here at the shoulder, you can see scarring here for when they probably like have dropped the sleeve, or maybe this was remade from something else and like had it updated to what we think is probably around 1871. So this could have been something from the 1860s that they've updated, sure. but there's scarring up here as well. But yeah, like this side seam, it's not nice. Let's be honest, most of us would have the if we did this, we would be like, please don't look at my side seam.
I mean, this teaches you the thing I'm always telling people is like, let it go. Nobody's going to notice that because none of you all notice that.
Yeah. Because obviously if it's good enough for Mima, it's good enough for me. Like,
right.
She is queen. So
that's a great example of taking a side seam out a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have anything where a dart was taken out or a skirt was repleated?
This was the start here was taken out too. So you can see that scarring here as well.
And then they slap some trim on it.
Well, no, it's completely visible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, also, she was deeply asymmetrical. So let me see if I can get down. Sorry. Oh God, I hate shaky cam. This point here is like an inch off from this point over here. Wow. It's completely asymmetrical.
Bodice shape to begin with. I'm gonna put that out there.
Yeah, it's wacky. But yeah, so we have darts taken out here and here, the side seam, the gusset underneath the armpit, and it's on both sleeves. She also has a huge fish dart, which I think helps illustrate how curvy she actually was, because sometimes we need fishes and sometimes we don't, but this is a really like pronounced
one. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes all the way around. And plus, I don't know if you guys, she had a little watch pocket in the other
Of course she did.
Pro tip. Put your watch pocket in your fish.
People would like a t-shirt that says, if it's good enough for Mima, it's good enough for me. So get on that, Abby. Merch. By the way, everybody go subscribe to Abby's channel because she's amazing and she shows you this stuff constantly on her channel, and it's awesome and hysterical most of the time. Kenna does not have a YouTube channel. That's why she's here currently, but she does have an amazing Instagram, which I would highly recommend.
We're working on it. She's, speaking of looking snatched and amazing all the time. I'm going to film a deep dive into Mima here for coming out in August, possibly next week, just FYI. So
Also, let me go ahead and shill for Abby's Patreon right now, where she gives you the extra footage from when she deep dives on stuff. So if you're real into this, give Abby a couple bucks a month and you will get mad footage.
I also do deep dive in construction notes.
Yep.
And measurements, stitches per inch, construction details, things like that. So,
yep.
Noelle, you can take
you're done.
Granny Cam off.
Okay. Working on that.
Thank you.
Chance to take back over and just mention you can replete skirts relatively easily. You take a waistband off, you rearrange the pleating to be a little bit more sparse maybe, and then put that waistband back on. Hopefully, if you made the waistband thinking in advance, there's a little bit extra on it. If not, again, you can use that cabbage. When I say cabbage, I mean extra bits of fabric, for those of you who do not know. And so many dresses have signs of alteration. I mean, we have...
Yes.
Modern Mantua Maker on Instagram did her entire thesis on 18th century dresses that had been remade.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I like almost everything in my own collection has been altered in some way, shape, or form. And the other nice thing about Victorian petticoats specifically is that the waistband, most of my petticoats are actually just a plain brown cotton. Like they're not even the matching fabric. So it's super easy just to like rip that off and do a new one. And so yeah, that's easy peasy. No
it's
problem.
also easier if you're hand sewing your garment than if you do it by machine, because as I'm sure most of you know, ripping machine stitches is a process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That leads to scarring.
Kenna, do you have slides for this section?
I do, yeah. I have a few more interesting examples. Let me pull those up. So this beautiful, beautiful example is one of the court gowns of the Princess of Denmark, Magdalena Sibylla. I visited the collection that holds this in Dresden last year and took the photo on the left when I spied an alteration that actually made the waist of the gown wider. I mean, I just love seeing stuff like this in extant garments, especially when they're at museums, for reasons that I will discuss later. The Ruthauer, which is the collection that holds this, recently made these collections accessible online, naturally after I spent the money to go to Germany to see them. So that image on the right is from their online collection, from their object page. And they also gave the measurements, which was fantastic, because looking at these gowns, you know, they're not for very small women. So I was really happy to find that you can actually see the alteration here in that object image on the right, as well as the one on the left. It looks like instead of simply enlarging the space between tabs, because you can't really tell here, but the bottoms of these bodices are tabbed still in the 1650s. Instead of just widening the space between tabs, they actually made a sort of gusset with a tab on the bottom. And it's just a tab. It's really incredible.
That's amazing.
It's totally something people could do with stays if they needed to.
Yeah.
It's not an alteration I've seen before, but it's really cool.
I've seen not this exact thing, but I've definitely seen stays in museum collections where they have just added strips of heavy duty linen to make the stays bigger. And it's not nice. Like this is so much nicer and like more elegant.
Yeah, they really worked on this, even though you can't see the tabs once it's properly worn. It's just happens that way. And these dresses, Magdalena Sibylla actually has several extant dresses, surviving dresses. And these at this point in her life are a great example of a woman with a very straight figure. And it still looks amazing. So just saying. We have our next piece here. So this is an 1890s example with a rather inexpert and asymmetrical alteration. Going back to what Abby was saying, if it's good enough for me, Ma, it's good enough for me. They added a full 5 inches or 13 centimeters to the center back of this gown, which I wouldn't normally recommend because adding all of that space in one place tends to really skew your proportions. But I guess it worked for this person. The main issue with that is when people gain weight, they don't tend to do it in one place. They tend to do it kind of all over. So then your sleeves would be a little tight, your neck might be a little tight. But again, clearly it worked. The fabric, you can tell it doesn't even match perfectly. I don't know if that's like a nap issue, where if the fabric was just turned on the wrong grain, or if it's a completely different fabric entirely. But you know, who's going to notice, really?
Is it asymmetrical?
It is absolutely asymmetrical.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Okay.
Good enough for me, Mom? Good enough for me.
Good enough for me. All right. So I'm finding this super helpful, and so is everyone in the comments. Is there anything else that most people might not consider when thinking about extant garments, and their expectations regarding seeing small or tiny waisted things?
Oh man, big deep breath here. There is so much. So much. So much bias that people don't realize exists that influences our perceptions. People collecting and exhibiting fashion in the last century or so have absolutely altered public perception of antique clothing, really insidiously, I think. Museums, and this is really especially art and fashion museums, not so much social history or local museums that you see. Museums enjoy collecting ideal garments, which generally means pristine items with tiny waists. This only recently has begun to change a little more as the public humanities in general have begun to value the little people, the people with ordinary lives like us. And the history is embodied by what we wear, how they show our lives, how we interacted with our clothing. So that pristine and tiny waist paradigm is really a remnant of 19th and early 20th century collecting that lasted way too long. But we'll admit from a collections care perspective, it is a lot better to have something that is in good condition. So pristine is still great, even though you can't tell as many stories with it, but you don't need a small garment to tell a good story that's outdated. So just to kind of drive this in, from someone behind the scenes at the Met at one point, they were setting up an exhibit at the Costume Institute a few years ago. They had two versions of the same dress from donations, probably. I recall it as a 1920 Chanel. It was something in that era that was essentially the ideal figure is very slender, kind of boyish, whatever that word is worth. But one of the dresses was much smaller and one was much larger. And they ended up going with the smaller one because it matched visitor expectations better. And I'm not sure if that's the only reason. You know, it could totally be that the Met made a really logical decision based on the conditions of the dresses or other factors. But as a museum professional, I can say it is 100% believable that they would go with a smaller dress purely because of visitor expectation. So the large museums like the Met, especially Fashion Museum Bath, I'm kind of assuming, I don't know that much about them, but from the image they project, the Met especially because they're so glitz and glamour, their annual gala, I mean, they really value that polished image, that the art of fashion instead of the social history of it. So that's absolutely a bias right there. Abby, did you have something to say about a Met exhibition at one point that you
Yeah. So it had, oh God, which one was it? I think it was like the interwoven globe one with like the textiles. I think it was that one.
Good exhibition.
And I'm sorry.
I like their exhibition catalog.
Yeah.
Really
it was like a really good exhibition too. But that one had this exhibition, and I think this is the one it had two of the most famous 18th century Met gowns that we all think of. That yellow one that's mislabeled as a polonaise. By the way, it's not a polonaise, it's an Italian gown. Thank you very much. Really wish they would fix that. And then it's the white printed cotton chintz gown that's usually photographed with it. That white gown has a wedge, which is a very common alteration point in 18th century, especially when you have the shift from like fairly straight, not so thrusty to like, hello, thrusty city, like, boo! And then everyone's like, boobies everywhere, just all the time.
What years would that be, Abby?
Like 1780s. So basically when we're shifting from 1770 to 1780, that's when we start getting like,
and then you roll into Regency where you're like just placing them on a shelf.
Yeah, and they're just up here. But this shape changed, and since 18th century gowns were like center front closing usually, sometimes they were on a bias, sometimes they were on a slight straight of grain, that oftentimes, very often, you will see a gown that has a wedge in it that is meant to be a fix, so that way it's opened up for the shift and the stays in that silhouette. That gown was in the Met was badly mounted. That, like, I was just standing there going, are you kidding me? And it was mounted on a mannequin that was too small for the gown, and the overlap was so severe that it was not actually dismounted correctly. Like, it was mounted wrong. And so again, to give that illusion that that woman who wore that gown was actually smaller than what she was, And when the reality is that she wasn't smaller, and she had an alteration because her boobs either got bigger from her stays or from other body changes. Like there was a visible big booby alteration in that 18th century gown. And yeah, they mounted it terribly, just awful.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent.
It absolutely feeds into the fact that, you know, museums aren't always perfect or correct. They're staffed by people. People make mistakes all the time, everyone.
Yeah.
And especially when their specialty isn't what they're being asked to write about in the museum object catalog, or if they're being asked to dress a mannequin with a gown that they don't really know what the right shape is. I mean, there's so many images online of museum mounted gowns that just are not the right shape at all. They don't have the right support. They have like a late crinoline instead of an early one, or instead of an 1850s thing that shouldn't even have a crinoline under it. Like, yeah, this thing just happens.
Have you heard of a bustle? Put that on there.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that has to do with funding. I think the reason why I don't give the Met as much lenience is because the Met is supposed to be a very well-funded museum. Let's not even touch that shenanigans right now.
That's but you know, discussion.
Yeah, but they're supposed to have a lot. I mean, if they have enough money to buy like worth gowns and couture gowns that are worth tens of thousands of dollars, and they're going out and bidding on those, you would then assume that they have the funding to have custom mannequins made, to have the team to pad these things out, to mount them properly. Smaller museums, I do not hold them to the same standards, because that would be like someone coming on here right now. I'll be like, Abby, how dare you not have this jacket mounted on the right mannequin? It's like, well, because this is just my dress form, you know? And so when we're in a smaller museum situation, funding is already tight for museums to begin with. This pandemic has not helped museums at all. They're just scrounging around, really genuinely working with what they have available. And a lot of those people who help with those things are actually volunteers, you know, so they're not even people who've gone to university for these things. Like they could just very well be like just people in that town who are like, oh, this is fun. I like old stuff. I can sew. Cool. Let's just do this, you know? So
which is great.
Give grace to museums. Like I will say that, like, please don't go and like bombard very small museums with how dare you don't mount these correctly. Like those mannequins are expensive. So yeah. I just have to.
Definitely necessary to say. I mean, even in
judge the Met all you want.
You know, honestly, disclaimer, as much as I wish the Met would do better in so many aspects, it's still a lot of their money is probably donor based. It's restricted to very specific uses. So if it's not specifically for mannequins, then they might just have no mannequin money. It just happens that way.
If you have a lot of money, donate to the Met's mannequin fund. Actually, donate for my and Abby's Patreon, and then donate.
Establish a position for one of us to then go into and fix all their object descriptions and their mislabeled, not really polonaises. Like, anyway, tangent. All of this feeds into the perception that these dresses are super tiny. And I'm going back to my slides here.
While Kenna's getting her slides going, it's a good time for people to start leaving me questions if they would like me to ask them. Please be polite and kind to your hosts. Thank you.
Noelle, I have to say I'm kind of sad you didn't ask me my opinions on hot dogs and sandwiches, but I will survive.
Wait, hold up. Do you want to talk about that?
I mean, I do, but I don't think we have time to have that entire tangent. So let's
just give me a yes or no.
I say there's a pyramid actually of sandwiches. So in Deep Thoughts by Abby, but I want to hear what Kenna has to say about worth gowns.
Okay.
There are far more larger garments in museums than I know about, primarily because most don't either. Large parts of collections are not even online. If they're even cataloged in the first place, some small museums have major issues with getting things cataloged because of staffing and hours and money. But even in those large museums that have online collections, they don't put measurements up. So shout out to Colonial Williamsburg, Daughters American Revolution Museum, Museum of London. Those museums have their shit together. They put their measurements online. It is wonderful. However, while many dresses cannot be accurately assessed for waist size based on proportion, as we've been talking about this whole time, these are two dresses, as an example, from the Met that I can pretty confidently tell are not 20-inch waist dresses, right? You can just tell. So these are great examples of the fact that, yet again, not all young or high society people were small. A number of the garments on my list are luxury, Parisian couture, Worth, Pingat, Roof, Beers, Paquin, Calusier, Weeks, or they're young special occasion dresses like wedding dresses. Everybody kind of has this idea that wedding dresses are, you're so tiny, and once you get married, you'll become larger, which is really damaging in and of itself. But that's not true. So many of these wedding dresses are like, we could fit them. It wouldn't be a problem. So, and these two gowns are House of Worth from the Met. So I think Kathy Hay actually had one of these up in her discussion the other day. Shout out to Kathy. Keep going here. This is a really fun one. One interesting thing about museums and display is that some used to allow live models for their clothing. This is verboten today. Do not do this. But they used to in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Doris Langley Moore, who was kind of a pioneering fashion historian, really pushed this with her collection. There's now a lot of debate about how mannequins are lifeless. They take away a key aspect of the viewing experience. I mean, imagine you could see these dresses on people moving around, people who really fit them, were wearing proper corsetry and undergarments. It would completely be a different experience. And I agree with that. I can't actually say it's a good thing for people to do that as a historical costumer, as a dress historian, as a textile conservator, as someone who works with historic textiles in general. I cannot recommend this. They are so fragile. You will, even if you don't hear ripping, and even if you don't see visible damage to the dress after you're wearing it, you've really taken so many years off of its lifespan. It will just continue to degrade at an even faster rate. So, tangent on that aside, there are several really interesting books that have these pictures still that are floating around on the internet, and they show that a lot of these dresses are still in collections today, or you can find, as I have here, images of them when they were sold at auction. These are from the Helen Larson collection, and they prove that, as antiques dealers call it, these dresses are a wearable size. And they provide great views of what these things look like on. Most of these images, the women are actually wearing proper undergarments and proper support, and because they were styled by experts, and it's really wonderful. I have a few volumes of my own because I found these pictures and went, I need to see these. These are just so interesting. And it is absolutely incredible to see, and we'll see how well we can see this, 18th century dresses on living, breathing human beings. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So these particular images on the slide are from Moore's 1949 book, The Woman in Fashion. If you're curious, I do not yet have it, but I'm hoping to get it. And for anyone who did not, if you can spotlight me real quick, anyone who didn't see what I just showed, more.
Hang on 1 second. There we go.
More images right there. So it's incredible, but we can't do this anymore. So these are historical artifacts in their own right. And in the end, we get this 18-inch myth from a real variety of sources, as I hope Abby and I have successfully showed. We really need to work to combat it. But in a single year of effort, I have managed to aggregate a list of over 800, I think it's 835 pieces as of yesterday, of clothing that in sizes that are wearable today, that many people could fit into today. I can only hope I'll have hundreds more by this time next year, and that I'll have expanded that size range. Remember, my highest is maybe 46 right now. I'd love to get into 50-inch zones. I mean, we have portrait paintings of women hundreds of years back. I mean, 18th century, 19th century, early Edwardian period, that are definitely that size range. So that clothing has to be out there somewhere. So if any of you have or know of clothing in museum collections that qualifies, especially anything above 30 inches, please drop me a line. A link would be best. I will take things from museums, private collections, eBay, auctions, Etsy, you name it, anything, as long as I have size, date, description, an image to show people. I am just so happy to get that out in the world and make sure that people feel represented by the history we engage in.
And as a person who is not an 18-inch waist, I would like to thank you for that work.
Trying my best.
All right, so we're going to take some questions. The number one question that has come up during this entire chat. Abby, what do you think about hot dogs? Are they sandwiches?
I don't know.
You don't know? All right, we're done. Let's turn off this
I
video
just
now.
want to say I don't disagree, because I actually think a sandwich has to do, I would debate sandwich in regards to leaven and unleavened bread. And since hot dogs are made with, the buns are leavened bread, I am open to the entertaining of the idea that a hot dog, regardless of what the dictionary says, because dictionaries change, regardless of that, just the concept of what kind of bread product we use, because it is meat and, you know, meat with bread. But usually sandwiches are leavened bread, not unleavened bread.
So you're pissed about this whole taco debate, aren't you?
I just,
what about
someone,
matzo sandwiches? Abby,
what?
What about matzo sandwiches?
Yeah,
Never
that's
had
my
a matzo
thing.
sandwich.
They're
But
tasty.
okay.
Those are
But
good.
see, but again, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there because someone was like taco. I'm like, that's a tortilla. Like,
No,
don't
people were
insult
saying that a hot
tacos
dog
with-
is a taco. And I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, is a taco a sandwich? Or what if you take two tacos and then put meat between them and eat that? Is that a sandwich?
I think that's a
Get it?
Crunchwrap Supreme according to Taco Bell.
Fourth meal, yo. That's
Doesn't
what that
it have
is.
Doritos in it.
I don't know. I just am like, I think actually sandwiches are a food pyramid. And I think there's just a hierarchy of what is a sandwich.
All right. I wrote an entire thesis on tacos when I was in college, that they're the world's perfect food because they
I
contain
agree.
all 4 food groups. They're scalable, they're portable, they don't require utensils. Like, just there's a million things that are the best about them. I think tacos are the world's perfect food. Okay, we're gonna stop talking about this. People want to know if people had special maternity clothing or they just altered the clothing that they had. Go.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question.
Kenna and I are like, I got it.
Both of you go.
Me.
You might have more to say on this than me, so I'm just gonna go put my own knowledge forth. There were absolutely specific maternity clothes, and I specifically excluded anything that was clearly very maternity from my list because I didn't want that skewing the results.
Sure.
There are even maternity corsets. If you're unfamiliar with that, Google it. It's amazing. Several historical costumers have done maternity corsets and maternity stays and used them during pregnancy. Really fantastic.
I'm not gonna lie, I have a set of maternity corset that I wore because sometimes I just want to have a big dinner.
You like them?
Let it out.
Do they support you?
It's legit.
So there's absolutely clothing that was made for maternity. It very often looks pretty similar, except in stomach size. The waistlines can change depending on, obviously, what area you're at. Sometimes they don't at all. Regency, not a problem. For most Regency dresses, you can just continue to wear your normal clothing. And there's also things like wrappers, maternity clothes that are very clearly maternity because they are just so loose throughout, and like a waist stay in the middle, which for a normal wrapper, we're getting into it here, for like a wrapper in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, there's a waist, like a belt inside that will keep the back flush with your own back. If it's maternity, it probably is going to have a pretty big one. So go on, Abby.
That was great. So yes, there are definitely maternity clothes. In fact, Colonial Williamsburg has a really great example of a petticoat jacket and waistcoat that was obviously built for maternity wear and is adaptable for like prenatal, natal, and postnatal. So there are definitely clothing there as well. I actually won in this mass hoard that I just received the other day. I actually got as a surprise a petticoat, an Edwardian petticoat that has hooks and eyes up the center back, but also has been altered to have hooks and eyes up the center front. And the only logical explanation for this is the expansion of the belly and just kind of allowing that to be able to be let loose and then being able to hook it back together like after she was finished like going through pregnancy. So yeah, there's definitely instances there. Another thing in the slides, and I try to get it set up on my computer so I could screen share, and I don't think that's going to work, but in all of the different proportion scales that I've put at the end of the slideshow that Kenna has done, in there as well, there's actually one book that has the quote unquote average women's proportion, and then it has the stout / maternity proportion scales.
Oh, kind of showing that right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it. Which one is it?
I think it's like the 1907 one.
Yeah. This one, 1904 to 1907?
No, next one. This one. No, go back.
Go back.
One more.
There.
Oh,
no.
Forward.
Yeah.
Forward. Stop. Nope.
That's 1920.
I know. Back one more. I think there's a delay on my end. There, stop. Hammer
1915.
time. Yes,
Okay.
this one. So you can see it says table of proportionate measurements for women size 32 to 44. So that is just like women. And you can see that's also a very nice range of size because that's a 32-inch bust up to a 44-inch bust. And just to note the proportions down there, 44 to 31. But when we go to stout, you'll see that the bust measurements actually have a lot of overlap. But it says down there, table for proportionate measurements for stout and maternity size. So one of the biggest differences, what we're looking at here is actually just the bust to waist ratio. And so you would adapt. So these patterns that you could cut and draft from these manuals. And for those of you all on the slideshow, that's actually a link. It'll take you right to the book and a cutting guide. And so you'll see that they've included that measurement, those proportions within that range. So if you were using this book to make clothing and you were getting ready to go through pregnancy or you were pregnant, like you could draft clothing for maternity wear using this cutting guide. I also just pulled this out too with the arrows, the 39, 30, 45 for that size 37, and that's in the stout proportion. That's actually just my normal body measure. Like that's very close to my normal body measurements. So again, I think also the concept of the idea of stout, and it does shift a bit through the 19th century. It's not necessarily that you're bigger or smaller. It also is very much about proportion. You know, what is the ratio between your bust and your waist? And so that's something to keep in mind as well. But I just thought this was really cool that they have it specifically also for maternity in this cutting guide. And you can also see they cut out Mrs., juniors, children's, infants, garments, everyone. And this one's great too. This one's from my Elmer Richards catalog that I discussed that had the whole thing about their own department. So you can see their size range based off of the measurements here for the different, and also my Sears catalog from 1939 to 1940, which once I went deeper into that, opened up a whole host of issues. So let's just ignore that. Let's just look to the left here where it says our range of sizes for Mrs. from the Elmer Richards catalog. So you can get an idea too of the range of sizes. So their stout size went up to a 52-inch bust and a 56-inch hip. And since the 20s, your waist doesn't matter. Screw it.
Woo!
Also interesting to note that in the previous examples that were pre-1920s, it was just Mrs. and women, and now it's average women.
Yeah, average proportioned women. So, and then you can also see the Mrs. up above there, which again, you can see how there is some overlap in sizing, but Mrs., it's for kids. It says the age 14, 16, 18, 20. And that's how you bought those garments. So if you bought a size 14, you bought it based off of that. You know, it's meant for a 14-year-old or someone around that body type. So while there is still some overlap when it comes to bust size, you'll notice that things are a bit different. Why the hip for the misses is so much bigger, I don't know. It gets screwy, but it's meant for kids, basically. That's what I'm getting at here.
We're working on that part.
Yeah, Ken and I are, there's a big juicy rabbit hole that we're going down. So
all right, guys, what is the one alteration that has really shocked any or all of you in an outfit that you never expected at first sight? I'm also going to take screen share and show the badge code. Silence. No one's had anything shocking is what I
I
just...
wish something would come to mind really easily, but I can't think of anything right now. I'm sorry. Maybe if Abby started talking, I'd be like, oh, yeah.
I feel like that thing that Abby just showed with that beautiful jacket, like there was a lot of alterations in there that I was like, what?
Yeah, I mean, like, and the thing is I guess because I'm having a hard time is because I've looked at so many extant garments like through my career that I think when I would have been like shocked and awed, I was so much younger that now I'm just like, oh, well, yeah, of course they do it that way, like hair flip, duh. Like, but
yeah, at this point, everything's equally creative. I mean,
yeah, so it's like, yeah, I don't think this is an alteration for letting out, but I definitely do have a petticoat that I just received that was remade from an 1880s foundation skirt with the bustle into an 1890s skirt. And the original foundation skirt is the lining of this skirt, but like the casing for the bustle like hoop is still there and it's just kind of all over the place. I've seen some real messy stuff. Like we as creators and historical costumers, we hold ourselves to a very high standard.
It's ridiculous, actually. Like it's stupid.
I think
like Mima would be like, why?
Yeah.
She would.
Why?
The absolute weirdest alterations I've seen haven't been for size necessarily, but they've been as Abby was mentioning earlier, 18th century fabric and dresses very frequently got remade into 1840s gowns, and some of them are absolutely bonkers. I mean, it's really common to find these gowns that have been turned around so that the front of the like 1780s gown or whatever it is has become the back of the 1840s gown, and you can tell really clearly, and it's just wild. So I think the first few times I saw that, and even now, that is the most surprising one. It never fails to just blow my mind.
I feel like we can start a myth here where it's like in the 1840s it was trendy to have boobs on your backside.
And no legs.
And no legs, just testicles.
Okay, so are there extant examples of women who have wildly different breast sizes because of mastectomy, body shape, etc.? And do they just pad or what?
So not that I know of so far, but I am actually considering doing a dissertation on marginalized bodies in that fashion. So I am very eager to start finding anything like that. It has to have existed. I mean, it has to.
Can I use modern resources to learn fitting, or does the fit change throughout history? For example, fitting an 18th century jacket, are the modern fitting resources legitimate? Like, are they useful?
I'll let Abby answer that.
I would just like to also talk about this a little bit because I fit myself a lot. No, you cannot use the modern stuff. It is not going to work because their clothes actually fit. Our clothes don't fit. Like, look at this. This doesn't fit. We use so many knit textiles. So like, we don't use wovens like we used to. Everything we do is either on the bias or it's a knit fabric. You can't really do that. Mm-hmm. And we cut with so much ease because we want to be comfortable, because we go out to fast food restaurants and eat and like hang out and whatever. And even your fancy clothes are cut with a lot of ease that just doesn't exist then. And they had, boning in their clothes to make sure it was rigid in there. So no, you can't really use those resources, but there are resources that are available about fitting, right? Like there are a ton of guidebooks that will help you with that. Like for my period, authentic Victorian techniques.
Dressmaking techniques.
Yeah. That's a great book because it teaches you how to fit yourself or someone else for that period, right? So you have to seek out the fitting instructions of that time and learn from those resources. Abby?
And to build off of that, another thing is the way the seams were done in the past, how things were seamed, also just body shape. It is going to change how you interact with the garment. Can you learn how to fit like through modern clothes? I was like, yes, you can pick up stuff that way, but the way you apply it, like Noelle, like you said, it's just a different application. All in that slide, all of those books that I have those proportion scales to, they're all cutting and fitting garment books from that time period. So literally they're free on archive. Just click it. And let me tell you something. I know it seems overwhelming to use those things, but if you can't skim these. Like we like to skim books today and just kind of look at the pretty pictures. They're expecting you to really read these. And then they get oldie-timey wordy verbose. And you're like, oh, my brain. But if you spend time with them and you actually draft according to those instructions, and you have padded your corset out so that way you have the correct proportions and the ideal proportions. Your body doesn't actually matter. Just put the pillows in the right place and you draft to those instructions. You don't actually have to, if you drafted them correctly, you don't actually have to do a lot of fitting. Like my Camille Clifford dress, I drafted from an Edwardian drafting manual book. I barely did anything in the fitting because it just, they're so good. Like they're just so good that there's no reason to like worry. It's like just go through the drafting process and then you can kind of just work. A lot of that's actually already done for you. Another thing with fitting on bodies, one, walk away. This is just a fitting tip. If it's not going for you, walk away.
Make something else.
Two, listen to the fabric. The fabric tells you what to do. You don't tell the fabric what to do. Mm-hmm. It's the boss. you listen. That's that. So just listen to it. But also, yeah, if you use those period manuals, you don't really have to worry about fitting that much.
I'm going to come in here and say, since Abby is not saying it, for the 18th century, American Duchess's Guide to 18th century dressmaking.
Buy Abby's book.
Because if you look at any like patterning for stage and screen book, they're not going to be telling you how these dresses actually went together and how they were patterned. From my limited
things that say stage or screen, put that book down.
Yeah. So Jean Hunnison actually pulled those patterns off of originals. So
the instructions.
But instructions are made for like quick changes and stuff.
Yeah, but she has some really good because I was super like, and then I was reading, I was like, oh, you sneaky.
She does disclaim like why she's doing things. So
yeah, but those shapes are from originals because she was actually an apprentice like Janet Arnold or something. So like,
I mean,
so mild defense in mild defense for Jean Hunnison.
Yes, given. But I mean, you guys have actually done that research and you know how it was done, and you explain that in a fairly accessible format for people. So there are several resources like that.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, a lot of this too is the later you get, the more modern you get in your sewing and instruction techniques, the more there's actually finesse when it comes to doing things. Like when you get into like the Edwardian period and vintage clothes, like there is a very set way to do stuff. The further back you go, the more Mad Max you get.
Yeah.
Like, does it fit? Does it work? Cool. Oh, you got a weird dart there? Oh, well, who cares? Like, no one cares. So long as it fits and you're happy with it, like the 18th century is Mad Max. So there's several ways to fit garments in the 18th century. And so, yeah, and I've done it several different ways, and I've developed my own way of how I like to do it. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the same way that works for either of you or anyone listening. Like, we all have our own ways.
Yeah, for sure. Someone's asking, was there a style difference in fitting a stouter woman? And this answer is amazing.
I mean,
there may be more panels in, like, there may be a different cut to the clothing, right? Not always, but there are spaces in which there's extra panels in the clothing, but the style will be identical.
So it actually, for most of history, that is completely true. Once you get into the time of like Sears Roebuck catalogs,
then
it does actually start to change, which is really interesting. And I think Abby might have a little more to say on that.
Well, I was going to add on to the patterning thing in Workwoman's Guide. They talk about the side piece for 1830s gown, and the angle in which you cut the side piece is dependent upon your body type. Yeah. So if you are considered stout by 1838 standards, you need to cut your side piece on a different angle with more bias stretch.
You get some more bias
than you do if you're not. And so, you know, and that's a real subtle difference, but everything else is the same. Everything else is the same. I don't actually, I know you're feeding me something, but I was too busy thinking about Workwoman's Guide. So if you would care to tell me what I was supposed to say, I would appreciate it.
I don't think we actually ended up putting any of the images on the slides, but essentially when you were talking about your Elmer Richards,
yeah.
The
where is she?
Catalogs. Yeah, if you wanted to pull it out right now, I would not say no.
I'll be right back.
Essentially, the fashion choices that they showcase for their average proportioned women versus their stout proportioned women, it does actually change. And part of that is they'll be advertising, you know, longer skirts to make you look slimmer, to elongate the body or something like that. Slim look fashions are become really popular starting in the 1920s or so, possibly for obvious reasons. I mean, 1920s is when this suddenly came into fashion.
And we're not shaped like this. If you're stout, you're not shaped like this. You're shaped like this. At least I am. So
we're kind of like this. I mean, everybody is that to some extent. I mean, nobody is like perfectly smooth.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you actually, in the 1920s, which was by no means the start of ready to wear, but it became very popular at that point, you really start to see different kinds of designs being marketed towards people of different body types in hopes of achieving a different ideal. So hopefully if Abby can come through with her catalog, you'll see that like decorations will be placed in different areas of the body, and it'll be different patterns that they think more like flatter someone a bit more.
But that doesn't start until pretty much the 1920s. If you're talking about 18th century, 17th century, 19th
Everybody
century,
dresses the same. No matter
everybody
body
dresses the same.
Yeah.
And
So-
they figure out a way to make you look amazing in the exact same style, which is a thing we don't seem to be able to do anymore.
And I mean, like, let's be honest, the 20s is really hard to wear regardless of who you are. Like, I do not look good in 20s clothes. I love 20s clothes, but I know.
They are beautiful on someone else than me.
Yeah, my does not work. So
I'm going to spotlight you so this gets bigger.
Okay.
There you go.
So here's like the first page. And so you can it's probably reversed, and I apologize for that, everyone. But
it's not actually.
It's good.
So they do use the term slenderizing, and down here in the measurements, the lengths do go to 45 to 48 inches, which is longer than the other sizes that you see in this catalog. So, but I mean, overall, like these coats are very much in keeping with the other coats in the other part. Oh, here we go. So this is the stout section of the catalog. And then this is one of the pages of just the average. I just managed to hit on a colorized photo, like colorized image of it. But you can see it's actually not, also anyone who's like a paper, like textile person, I apologize. I know I'm manhandling this. Please don't at me. I know I'm trying to be as careful as I can.
Do you guys think that tailors and dressmakers and mantua makers and all that specialized in stout, or are they just made for everybody?
Back in the past, they just made for everybody.
Yeah.
Like
if you're fitting an individual,
people are cutting for an individual. Like you just get used to, like when I'm cutting on someone and I'm fitting on someone, I don't think about their body in like I think about their body in a very analytical way. Yeah. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, you hold this elbow shoulder this way. Oh, do you know you're short-waisted? Oh, do you know that like this is shaped this way over here and like your body does this and your body does that? Like, I don't think about it as a person. I think about it just as like a thing. Yeah. Like its own thing. And that's it. But I mean, the fashions in here, they're really good. Like I said. And I actually and I made a note of this too, because these are illustrations, they're not photographs, but the way that they illustrated the women in the stout section of this catalog, they are beautiful, they are attractive, but they're also not drawn the same way as the other models. Like they are actually representative of the body type. Like their shoulders are a little bit broader, their faces are a little bit fuller, and it's just really nice to kind of see that. There are other representational issues in this catalog, but it is the 1920s, so what do we expect? But they don't do that thing where we see today in modern imagery and fashion where they're like, all these sizes, but everyone looks exactly the same. And they're like plus size models, but they don't represent they don't represent like actual diversity.
They're all like shape. Perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a question. So go ahead.
I was gonna say, at least in this catalog, I was like, they represented their customer.
That's really great. We didn't get sent to a different store.
No, you had your own department.
Yeah, fantastic. There's a lot of questions, and I'm going to leave it up to you guys if you want to talk about this, because I do think it's sort of tangential to this discussion. A lot of people are asking about like breastfeeding and like the size of breasts changing for that, but also how functionally that went. But I mean, we're talking about, all of history, so that seems like kind of a difficult subject. But do you have any tertiary commentary you want to make on that?
18th century. Well, one, it's center front closing. So depending on where you were in postnatal depends on how you dealt with this. So whether you're wearing something like a soft pair of jumps or a quilted waistcoat and you're still in bed, like recovering from giving birth, like that's obviously very easy access. But when I worked at Colonial Williamsburg and we did the foundation's not the tokens, the Foundling Hospital token exhibition, they blew up a print from the Foundling Hospital from the 1740s, and it was just like huge, just massive. But when it was zoomed in, like, and the women were bigger than life size. What we saw in the section that was supposed to be the mothers who had the foundling children, they had taken their kerchiefs, switched them around so the long pointy end was in the front, and you could see like images of women breastfeeding with their gowns on in public, and they were actually just using their kerchief as basically what women use as like a breastfeeding like shield today. And yeah, they would just pull up over the stays and just go. Yeah. Modern mothers, I'm not a mother. I don't know how well it works, but that's what the images show. And when we were all like, oh.
There's Victorian corsets that have lacing down the side that you just unlace it and pop it open. Out you go. The thing that I don't get with that is like all my Victorian wear is like buttoned down the front. Like, are you sitting there unbuttoning 47? I'm like, do you just get a wet nurse, mate? Like, I don't know.
So I actually have a really great, I wish I remembered what it was and where it was from. I have seen an extant 1840s gown, not personally, but like online, you know. Yeah. And get up a little bit so I can kind of demonstrate this. It's like a fan front style gown. So it has all this pleating down the front. And at this end of it, this edge of like that pleated section, it opens. And it opens to reveal the breast. So wow. It is proven to be a breastfeeding gown. I think it's like a white sheer summer frock. It might be in the Irma Bowen collection, which is a fantastic collection, by the way. So there are alterations that were performed on certain gowns to be able to breastfeed whilst in them. As Noelle pointed out, some corsets have like laced in sections right down the middle and allow you to do that. And there's also a pair of stays at one of the, I think
those are not for babies.
Oh, all right.
Oh, I was like, someone's gonna bring this up, and no. Most museums are like, we'll just kind of not address, like, we'll let people think that, but no, the general consensus. So interesting
if you talked about though. Come on.
Like, most general consensus is more like, that's for other things.
Okay, well, ignore that I said that. I have seen the extant 1840s gown that is made for breastfeeding. I have seen other actual, like, very clearly maternity corsets. Because in some maternity corsets, even there was a great one on, I think, Antique Gowns a few months ago that was bright red, and it had an attachment below the stomach to support the baby. At the same time as having all of the extra bits of lacing to expand. So there's like, totally a whole market for that.
Most Victorian corsets, like especially the later ones, just come right up to that spot anyway, and then it's real easy. If you need to, you can get that out. Especially if you're voluptuous with milk at the time, it will be even easier for you to get going there, I think so.
I think another thing to think about too is the context of your life at that point in time. I think again, like, it's really easy for us to apply our modern life and our modern, like, how we function, and then go, how did they do it? And it's like, like, if a woman was in a position where she didn't have to go to work every day, then it's not as big of a deal, because you're not going to be, you know, in a like normally corset with, like, you know, buttons all the way up the front. Like, you're going to have at-home garments, just like we have at-home garments today. And you're going to have clothing that adapts with that. Obviously, if you're in a social situation where you have to leave the home because you're working, you know, then there's other issues that go into account there. So just...
But you're probably not wearing unless you're in high society, in which case you have a nurse for that. You're not wearing high society gowns around for 16 hours a day, parading around, not paying attention to your children. You know, like, you're home with them. You're probably not going out a lot. You know, your life was completely different.
Yeah. And there are not just like the normal corsets that we think of. Like, when you look at 1800s catalogs and magazines, there's a whole slew of corsetry that, you know, was corded and lightweight, and shoulder straps and no shoulder straps, buttons and no button, you know. So there's options. There's loads of options. It's not just one thing. It's not homogenized in any way.
Yep. All right. We're basically at 2 hours, so I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. You guys have anything additional you want to say or add to this at the very end? Your parting words? Nothing? All good.
Thanks for having me.
Both of you could probably look perfectly good in 1920s gowns. So
no, I've worn originals. I don't.
I'm willing to give it a shot. Sure.
Here.
Yeah, I'll do it.
This booty goes out way too far.
Listen, anyone who wants to wear a 1920s gown, regardless of size, should, could, and would. So
yes,
here we go.
That someone did
they
ask a
did.
question, which I think is not really something I was going to go into, but they're like, how do you get the confidence to just wear the thing if you're a stout person, especially like natural form or what? How do you do that? You put the gown on and you realize it still looks good. You pad where you need to pad, and then you go out with your friends who are already going to make you feel good anyway. Like, just do the thing. Do the thing. Look at Mima. She's banging. I'd hang out with Mima.
Do we need to see that booty again? Because Mima was...
She got it going on.
She did not come to play. She came to slay.
Like teacups on that thing.
I know this is Chrissy D'Angelo's Lotta bustle, so it is literally the biggest one. But we were putting every bustle on possible, and this was the only one that was like, "Oh, that works."
Great.
Like this is the only one that works. So
all right, well, I'd like to thank you guys both for coming to my channel and doing this panel here. It was very kind of you, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And it was really great to spend a couple hours talking about this stuff. Again, go subscribe to Abby because she's talking about this stuff all the time. And Kenna's Instagram is lit at like midnight-ish when she starts going down a research rabbit hole. She will show you all the things. So
you also make the most incredible things, and I'm just like,
yeah.
Yes, so good.
That's for sure. All right, I'll see you guys later.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye everyone.